Hello and welcome to Motivational Interviewing. Today we will talk about what is motivational interviewing and why is it important to learn. We will discuss presentation both from the instructor side as well as student side, class expectations, content, and a general structure of the topics we will discuss. Furthermore, we will explore what it means to use evidence to support the use of MI techniques in clinical settings, and we will examine the trans-theoretical model of change, also known as the stages of change model. And in regard to this model, we will also have the chance to practice identifying stages of change as part of our lab. So how can we apply motivational interviewing techniques in the context of health and wellness coaching? A very important thing to understand is that the coaches partner with the client seeking self-directed, lasting changes, and those changes need to be aligned with the values that the client or the patient brings to the conversation. That is how we can promote health and wellness and thereby enhance well-being in general. One other important aspect is that health coaches in this context, they display unconditional positive regards for their clients or patients and a belief in their capacity for change. What they do is also honoring the fact that each client, each patient, each person, as a matter of fact, is an expert on their life. In fact, being an expert, we could argue, is having the experience or making the experience, and that definitely applies to the stages of change model. The health coaches also ensure that all interactions are respectful and non-judgmental. Now, of course, it's very important to understand the nature-nurture to be in this context, because for everything we experience in life, from the cognitive, behavioral standpoint, emotions and feelings, we do certainly have to take into account their neural underpinnings, which means to have a solid understanding of basic neuroscience, but at the same time how to apply such knowledge in the context of ameliorating processes as part of our clinical strategies. Students thus will learn techniques such as active listening, reflections, open-ended questions, positive affirmation, summarizing, which are not only the core concept in motivation interviewing, but they can be used to better understand our client or patients, empower them, and also safely guide them in their changes of behavior. Furthermore, I would like to remind students this course is part of the required curriculum to prepare students to be eligible to sit for the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaching Certification exam. In practice, upon the completion of this course, students will be able to define what motivational interviewing is, what application MI has, examine what it means to understand the current evidence around using MI practices to promote health-related behavioral change in general, and understand when motivation interviewing is effective for promoting healthy behavioral change. Also, by way of comparing different counseling techniques, positive psychology, and many other fields that are at the intersection between medicine, healthcare, neuroscience, and social behavioral sciences. So what is psychology so important in the context of motivational interviewing? What does it mean to utilize evidence-based clinical practice to improve behavioral changes, taking into account patients' wishes, values, and also the ability to engage in the stages of change model? Psychology is an important field which is at the intersection of biobehavioral components and, more generally speaking, theoretical approaches to behavior. Now, of course, psychology is both a science as well as an art, and the same skill set used in the context of, for instance, a clinical psychology assessment and session, in the context of psychotherapy, for instance, within behavioral therapy, the same skill set has to be applied to motivational interviewing in the bigger framework of integrative health and wellness coaching. Now, to go back a little bit to the definition of motivation interviewing, what can we say from the historical perspective? MI is by definition a counseling approach, and it was developed in part by clinical psychologists William Miller and Stephen Rolnick. It is not a necessarily complete different approach to either counseling or clinical psychology, but it is definitely based on Carl Rogers' method to help people commit to the difficult process of change. Now, this process, of course, is twofold, and there are two important aspects to this process. One is motivation, and the other one is commitment. And both are extremely important, not only for a better understanding of the patient-provider interaction, communication, or rapport, but also to ensure that the client, the patient, is on the right path to move through the stages of change. Going back to the beginnings of motivational interviewing and talking about positive psychology, humanistic psychology, and so on and so forth, it will be very interesting to examine what Carl Rogers had to say about what it means to be us, what it means to have a self. And an interesting quote by him states that the closer our self-image and ideal self are to each other, the more consistent or congruent we are, and the higher our sense of self-worth. Now, since motivational interviewing is both a theory as well as a series of techniques and strategies, it is important to understand that this counseling style is based on certain assumptions. Ambivalence about all patterns of behavior, especially addictive behavior, and ambivalence as in the opportunity of resolving this problem by working with your client's intrinsic motivation and values. It is also important not to mistake ambivalence for resistance. Then another important factor is the alliance between you as a health coach, as a practitioner, as a provider, and your client is a collaborative partnership to which each of you bring important expertise. Again, as we previously mentioned, being an expert, having expertise also means having direct exposure and experience. This counseling style is directive, however, not authoritative, and definitely not authoritarian. It's definitely more empathic and supportive. It is a style that promotes change and avoids direct argument or aggressive confrontation, also because these are not effective and definitely they're not nurturing, and they might even increase your client defensiveness and reduce the likelihood of behavioral change. Now, let's examine for a second the trans-theoretical model of change as discussed in the work by Prochaska and Di Clemente. So there are 5+1 core stages here. We can start from the pre-contemplation stage, which defines no intention of changing behavior. Moving on to the contemplation stage, being aware that the problem does indeed exist, but still there's no commitment to action. This stage is followed by preparation, which is intent upon taking action, and action, which is an active modification of behavior. After action, the next stage is pretty much, and by pretty much I do not mean it's easier to achieve an action, but it's important to be understood from the perspective of time. This stage is maintenance, which defines sustained change, where new behavior replaces old behavior, or new behavioral patterns replace old behavioral patterns. Of course, this sixth stage, the one we will discuss now, is what happens when things are not progressive according to the quote-unquote right clinical path. This stage is relapse, which again simply means to fall back into old patterns of behavior. Another concept here is this metaphor of an upward spiral, learning from each relapse. Okay, so these stages of change model also promotes the idea that time is not necessarily linear, which is usually the assumption we have in clinical psychology for the most part, definitely in behavioristic approach within clinical psychology, but it's more of a circle. And therefore, it doesn't really matter where you are on this circle, there's always an opportunity to move on to the next stage so that you don't feel stuck, you don't feel unable to move on to the next phase in your life.